Hello, I'm Earl Weinberg, and welcome to Book Circle Presents An Ever-Mounted Cavalry. Our protagonist, Ivy, has just learned from her friend, Brother Eugene, how he came to be turned into a centaur, which is not something you usually learn. And she has also learned from her other friend, Lieutenant Fletcher, that there is a spy in their midst. They walked on in silence. For a few paces, Ivy tried to feel the news about the spy was very important, but that was hard to do in the shadow of Brother Eugene's tale. Eugene broke the silence by asking Fletcher, "Does Miss Blackholt know? I came from her to find you. I was thinking up reasons to give Ivy," he looked over his shoulder at her, "for getting alone with you, but at least that problem went away." They were coming near the edge of the wood. Brother Eugene shook out the white silk scarf, preparatory to assuming the appearance of a man on horseback, but Fletcher turned and raised a hand. "Wait, I've got something I want to try." He looked at Ivy. "Ever ridden a horse?" "No." She looked from Fletcher to Brother Eugene, surmise dawning. "Well, this would be something like, Brother, if Ivy is willing." She decided she was. "But what are we trying?" she asked, as Brother Eugene crouched down and Fletcher lifted her onto his back. "I want to see how the glamour scarf copes with a rider," Fletcher answered. "Proceed, Brother." Brother Eugene rose carefully. "Hold on with your knees, Ivy," he told her, "and grab a handful of jacket if you want." She wanted. Eugene shook out the scarf and wrapped it. Ivy almost let go of his jacket. A second Brother Eugene had appeared between her and the real Brother Eugene's human torso. It was semi-transparent, with two conventional legs sitting on a saddle. It was, she realized, Brother Eugene as she had always seen him before, but her arms reached through it, still grasping the folds of the real jacket. "Very good," Fletcher said. "Looks perfectly normal. What do you see, Ivy?" A ghostly version of Brother Eugene, human." She leaned over and peered around Eugene's torso. "And a ghost horse head, Blanco." "Right, on we go." They exited the woods for Miss Blackholt's garden, then came round to the front door. Miss Blackholt heard the clop of hooves and came out to meet them. She saw Ivy apparently riding behind Brother Eugene on Blanco. "Oh, no!" she wailed. "I'm sorry," Ivy said reflexively, and she really felt sorry to distress Miss Blackholt. Hastily, she let go of Eugene's jacket and slid off his back, as if this would somehow reduce the damage. The phantom monk solidified, the real Eugene vanished, and she was standing next to Eugene on Blanco, as she had done every day for weeks. He gave her an encouraging smile, and she reflected that, really, she was seeing a copy of his smile. Well, at least it was a faithful copy. "We're getting all our troubles delivered in a lump," Fletcher told her. "So I see," Miss Blackholt replied glumly. "Brother Eugene, we need to confer." She waved toward the garage. He nodded and rode Blanco, walked over, slid the door open, and entered. Miss Blackholt and Lieutenant Fletcher followed. "You may as well come too, Ivy," she told her. Ivy had last seen Brother Eugene's quarters in the brief glimpse she had taken when she thought she had found Blanco missing. She looked around more carefully now. It looked much the same as it had when she looked in on her first day. A bed of two mattresses side by side, under canvas, with pillows and blankets stacked on one edge, and a very few bits of furniture, including a small bookcase. The main change was that the bookcase had overflowed. A few neat piles of books lay on a bit of canvas beside it. Brother Eugene had already doffed the glamour scarf and shimmered back into his true appearance. He stepped delicately onto the bed, lay down like a great cat as he had on the path in the forest, then, again as he had in the forest, patted the canvas next to him for Ivy to join him. She did. Lieutenant Blackholt and Fletcher sat on the edge of the mattress, and Ivy got the impression that these were their regular positions. that they had sat there and conferred with Brother Eugene many times when she, Ivy, had been elsewhere or asleep. Legitimately asleep. "How did this happen?" Miss Blackholt asked, looking at Ivy cuddled against Brother Eugene and wondering if they were in alliance against her. Ivy plunged in. "I was listening last night at the top of the stairs and watching. I haven't been drinking the tea." "She doesn't like chamomile," Fletcher noted sourly, "but she didn't want to hurt your feelings, so she regularly dumped it out the window." Miss Blackholt closed her eyes as if in pain. "I considered using peppermint," she muttered, "but thought it too stimulating for a sleeping potion." "Maybe add honey to the chamomile," Fletcher suggested. "Just before bed? Her teeth!" She waved her arms dismissively. "Water or tea under the bridge. Ivy, if you want tea before bed after this, pick out the flavor yourself, and I shan't bother to charm it. So, you saw these gentlemen changing last night?" "Just me," Fletcher growled. "Yes, well," said Ivy. She cleared her throat and again recounted her confrontation with Brother Eugene. As she spoke, her eyes wandered over the opposite wall, the one with the door in it. Eugene had hung a crucifix next to the door, and there were hooks bearing clothes hangers. Linen was folded on a bit of canvas on the floor next to a pair of boots. Boots? And pants on the hangers? Eugene took over and summarized what he had told Ivy. When he was done, Ivy pointed at the clothes and asked, "Are those what you wear when you come over looking human?" "Oh, yes," said Eugene. "Miss Blackholt has enough to do making me look human without doing the wardrobe, too, and it's easy enough for the cavalry to supply them." "You see," said Fletcher to Miss Blackholt, "without the tea we never had a chance." She nodded. "Ivy, you now have more lessons to learn. How to live on this side of the sundering." "I understand," said Ivy, "at least some." "And," Miss Blackholt continued, "she should probably hear about the spy." "I need to hear too," put in Brother Eugene. "Is it Corporal Limney?" Ivy asked. Fletcher threw his hands in the air. "Do you have an aunt named Marple by any chance?" "It's just that he's the only other sundered person I know of, and he seems rather too inquisitive." She reflected a moment. "He isn't a very good spy, is he?" "Yes, it's Limney," said Fletcher, "and no, he isn't very good at it." "How did you catch him?" asked Brother Eugene. "I haven't caught him yet," Fletcher answered, "just discovered him. I was making my check-in call." He looked to Ivy. "Wednesdays and Saturdays I make a quick check-in call to my superiors using the phone in the pub." Today was Wednesday. We used various code words and circumlocutions. I asked if they had received last night's report yet, since Limney went buzzing off with it straight away, and the distance isn't that great, and the chap on the other end was puzzled. Why, he asked, should I expect them to have it already? I said it wasn't a sure thing, but they ought to be getting it soon now. So he got puzzled some more, puzzled enough to ask the gremlin to make sure no one was listening on the line, so we could talk in clear. He smiled at Ivy's expression. Very handy, having gremlins on your side. He turned to Miss Blackholt. "What did Limney say his schedule was?" "He said he'd pick up whatever I had every day except Thursday and Sunday." She looked at Eugene. "It's not." Fletcher nodded. "The chap at the office said Limney's schedule was supposed to be Monday, Wednesday, Friday, unless otherwise requested. Since we did the experiment last night, a Tuesday night, Limney should only be picking up the report now at the earliest." "Did the Vanguard and Majory get the information we handed over on the extra days?" Brother Eugene asked. "Each kind of report is sequentially numbered," Miss Blackholt told him. "They would have noticed any gaps in the numbering." "What if he changed the numbers?" "That would be hard to do without leaving clues," Fletcher answered. "I sat in the pub and smoked like a chimney and tried to look nonchalant for half an hour until they called me back and told me there was no sign of that. So he's not stealing the information, he's copying it and passing it to his clients, who want it urgently enough that they want a jump of even a day or two on us. Else why the extra pickups?" "Or," said Miss Blackholt, "he wants it broken up into smaller chunks so he can copy it more easily." Fletcher nodded. Either way, there is no legitimate reason for his behavior. I'm not to let him leave. They're sending someone down to collect him. So we have to keep him here, said Eugene. Right. Miss Blackholt rose abruptly. I want reinforcements, she declared, heading for the door. I know we're 3 against 1. Not 4, Ivy. 3 against 1 with surprise on our side, but he's an unknown quantity. I'm not arguing, said Fletcher, rising and following, but who are you calling in? Melissa. Anyway, you know I have to tell her about this. Who's Melissa? Ivy asked. Brother Eugene rose and took her hand. He chuckled. Another question for your list. Ivy waited while Brother Eugene put on the glamour scarf, then, once he looked like a man on horseback again, asked, Do you know who Melissa is? Yes, but just go take a look, he said, shooing her out the door with a wave of his hand. She went and saw Miss Blackholt and Lieutenant Fletcher in the side garden. Miss Blackholt appeared to be addressing one of the hives, while Lieutenant Fletcher stood respectfully at parade rest a couple of paces behind. Ivy remembered Chio's encounter with the talking dragonflies as related by Brother Eugene. She remembered the bee wandering over the embroidery. Melissa is a bee? Well, the bees are all fairies? How many thousands of bees were there in these 4 hives? No, only a few of them. Ivy watched as Miss Blackholt and the lieutenant turned from the hives and went in the front door. A few specks followed them. Brother Eugene started toward the door, then paused and looked up the hill. Ivy followed his glance. Everything was quiet, but there were 3 people dotted around the landscape. Brother Eugene made a wincing face. You go ahead, Ivy, he told her. I'll come when I can do so discreetly. What's the matter? You're disguised as a man on horseback. If anyone noticed a man on horseback go in by the front door, it would cause talk. The sundering won't make them look away? No, there's nothing magical about riding a horse in through the front door. It's just very odd. You go along. I'll dawdle about until the coast is clear. Ivy crossed the drive and went in the door, knowing that even if Brother Eugene wasn't coming in right now, she would find something odd. She was not disappointed. Miss Blackholt, with Lieutenant Fletcher again in the background, was talking to a tall young woman who looked like someone out of a movie magazine. She had short curly blonde hair under a brown velvet cap with 2 long pheasant feathers. Her eyes were huge and dark. Entirely human? Ivy couldn't help wondering under the circumstances. She wore a brown velvet skirt and jacket matching the hat, a yellow silk blouse, and shiny black leather boots and gloves. She fiddled with, a small bouquet of crocuses, yellow, white, and violet. She turned to Ivy and smiled. Hello, Ivy. Still reading Fabre? Her voice was a husky contralto. Yes, miss, Ivy answered slowly. The one on hunting wasps, though this seemed an unfortunate choice at the moment. Ivy, this is Melissa, said Miss Blackholt, quite unnecessarily. Ivy nodded. How do you do? She hoped that was good enough manners. She thought of the Blood Lady and the Earl King and the other alarming phase in the tale Brother Eugene had just told her. And Miss Blackholt and Fletcher seemed, if not nervous, at least on their guard. Thank you, Ivy. I'm fine, but you are in a bit of a pickle. I gather you've stepped across the sundering just this morning. Her smile broadened. Yes, miss, I didn't know. One never does. She turned to Miss Blackholt. If she's a security problem, I'll take her. Miss Blackholt went from merely on guard to alarmed. Oh, no, that's not at all necessary, and her parents would miss her. Not for long, and not even a century. Fletcher appeared behind Miss Blackholt's shoulder. Both of them looked stern. I'm sorry, but I must insist, said Miss Blackholt. She is under my hospitality. Melissa shrugged. Through the drumming of the blood in her ears, Ivy heard her say, Your lookout. Now, this Limney character, I gather, is definitely a security risk. Yes. We're to hold him here, Lieutenant Fletcher said, until they can come collect him. We have numbers, and we should have supplies, but more numbers would be good. Melissa nodded. I suppose he knows about us? She waved a hand upward. Ivy followed the gesture and saw 4 or 5 bees hovering above the velvet hat. "We must assume so," said Miss Blackholt, "since I reference you in the reports, and he has had every chance to read them." "Oh, well, when is he coming?" "Any time, probably soon. If he is very late, that is probably a sign that he has caught wind of us." "I see. Daisy," she said to the air, "Violet." 2 young women stepped out from behind Melissa. They could not possibly have been concealed behind her, but there they were anyway. They had short blonde hair and large dark eyes, but were otherwise not like Melissa. They were several inches shorter, more squarely built, and wore women's army uniforms, only brown and without insignia. Workers, thought Ivy. Is Melissa the queen? Is she their mother? Where did the clothes come from? "Violet," Melissa ordered, "get the swords. Daisy will have tea while we wait. Help Claudine." She smiled at the mortals, then turned to look out the window. Miss Blackholt went to start tea, carefully not looking offended at having her own house commandeered. Daisy trailed after, and Violet went out the door. Ivy stood frozen until she saw Fletcher beckoning her over. Once she was close, he tilted his head down and murmured, "If you feel threatened by any Fae, tell them you are under the hospitality and protection of Grand Normandy, of their Majory and Vanguard. Got that?" She nodded. "And I am? Really?" "Oh, yes. It wouldn't do to lie about that to Fays. Grand Normandy has a deal with all the Fays around here, through most of England and France. The Pact, the lords and ladies Brother Eugene told you about, they enforce it." "Good. Thank you." Melissa was still looking out the window. "What's the monk doing?" she asked. "He's waiting until no one's looking so he can come in without drawing attention," Ivy answered. She made an effort to keep her voice level and succeeded. Melissa gave an impatient sigh and stepped outside. Ivy saw Brother Eugene lift his cowboy hat to her. They began talking. "What would happen if Melissa took me?" she asked Fletcher. "She was just getting a rise out of you lot." Ivy turned in surprise. The speaker was Daisy, setting cutlery at the table while Miss Blackholt worked at the aga. "She's not prepared to turn you into a bee or shrink you to bee size and keep you in the hive. And where else would she put you?" Ivy felt relieved at hearing about Melissa's limits. It was also good to hear Daisy talk about her with no awe whatever. But it raised questions. "Why can't she change me? She and you change yourselves." "That's ourselves. Much trickier to change someone else. No, she's no shapecaster. None of us is." "Which is a pity," said Miss Blackholt, turning around with a kettle in hand. "It would address Brother Eugene's problems directly." "But even the Red Lady couldn't undo it," Ivy said. "Oh, he told you about that?" "Yes, well, we have to work in small steps. At least I've got the seeming worked out." "A seeming isn't a transformation?" Ivy asked. "It's a kind of illusion," said Miss Blackholt. "Brother Eugene was really changed. He really is a 1,000-pound mix of man and horse now. But the seeming potion can make him seem to be a normal human, for a while. It's fragile and doesn't last long." "More vis?" suggested Daisy, slicing a loaf of Miss Blackholt's acorn bread. "That just seems to reduce the needed size of the dose and extend the shelf life." "What's vis?" asked Ivy of Fletcher. "Magical energy," he answered. Melissa breezed through the door. Behind her was the confusing sight of Brother Eugene dropping his false appearance as he ducked to come in. Suddenly the room was very full. Brother Eugene had seemed big enough outdoors, but indoors he took up the floor space of a large sofa, and his head nearly brushed the ceiling. He fumbled with his hat in his hands and looked apologetic. Miss Blackholt strode to a kitchen shelf, seized a small bottle, and presented it to Brother Eugene. Thank you very much, Lieutenant," he said solemnly. Then he turned to Ivy and said, "Ivy, I should have thought of this, but could you go back to my quarters and fetch over a pair of pants and a pair of undershorts? And there's a dressing gown hung up among the jackets." She nodded left and was soon back. Brother Eugene thanked her, put the dressing gown over his jacket, and downed the contents of the little bottle. The horse body shrank and pulled into the gown. The monk's jacket bulged momentarily as, Ivy supposed, the forelegs pulled up and merged with his arms. And there he stood, on human feet, no taller than he usually was on an evening of radio and chemin de fer. He had taken the transformation with a calm face and no stumbling. Well, he'd had practice, even if Ivy had never seen it. Thinking fast, Ivy handed him the undershorts, then the pants, then stockings. He thanked her at each one and smiled at the stockings, which he had not mentioned. Finally, he put the boots on and removed the dressing gown. He smiled at Ivy, who smiled back. Exasperating, said Melissa, who had watched carefully. What is? Asked Ivy, just a shade sharply. Why should Melissa not like Brother Eugene taking the form he preferred? Melissa took no notice of Ivy's tone. The spell on that potion was a good solid seeming and well juiced up, but once it hits him, it goes shaky. The spell that transformed him is over and done with. It's as if something wakes up and fights with the seeming. If only we knew what, sighed Miss Blackhold. Well, we'll just keep working, declared Melissa. Ivy decided she felt a little better about Melissa, but she remembered the bee, Melissa, on the embroidery again, which raised another question. You're working on a potion to let Brother Eugene look human, right? She asked Miss Blackhold. Yes. What does that have to do with a magic embroidery that makes Lieutenant Fletcher look like a centaur? Miss Blackhold looked to Fletcher, who waved his permission. I was given it to study the spell to see if I could work it backward. You didn't make it? Who did? Ivy asked. My uncle, Dr. Blackhold. He is the court wizard for Grand Normandy. So why is your uncle working on a spell to disguise humans as centaurs? Melissa laughed. So many questions. She has a list, said Fletcher grimly. Ivy held it up proudly. Let's see. Ivy handed it to her. What do you mean by next king? Brother Eugene was telling me about the time in the Alps and about the prince, but he went on being prince after the king died, and the generals said they needed another king. Prestissimo, Eugene quoted softly, but we didn't get one, not quickly. Grand Normandy doesn't pick kings the way Britain does. He looked to Fletcher. Fletcher waved permission again. It isn't at all secret, he said. All of sundered Europe knows. Why shouldn't Ivy? Eugene nodded and continued. We elect them. That is, the noble houses elect the king from among the members of the royal family. Ivy's eyes lit. That's why the other prince was the heir-elect. Exactly. And with the king and the heir dead, it meant we had to have an election right away in the middle of a war. You would think, said Fletcher, looking sour, that the nobles would push it through as quickly as possible. But no. Some wanted Prince Hugh, while others wanted his mother, Queen Ruth. The royals didn't really care. They saw we needed speed. They even proposed a joint monarchy, like William and Mary, you know, to get things moving. After all, we were in this state because we had a new and mostly unknown enemy who might crop up again at any time. But the bickering went on. Violet came back. She carried a bundle of swords, which she took to the kitchen table and laid out. Each was wrapped in a grubby gray cloth, and Ivy wondered if they had been buried somewhere out in the wood. Ceremoniously, Violet picked one up and presented it to Melissa, holding it laid across both her palms. Melissa, who had been looking bored during the political talk, now smiled, took the sword, and drew it out. It was a shiny brown rather than metallic, and looked as if it was made of horn. The handle was all of a piece with the blade made of the same stuff. Melissa turned it over, looked along the blade, and smiled again, satisfied. Then she resheathed it, quite slowly. Miss Blackhold caught Ivy's curious stare. The scabbard is 2 layers of wax wrapped in silk, she explained. Right, said Melissa. Good protection. And the blade, Ivy thought, looked as if it was made of chitin. There had appeared to be a groove down the middle, too. For, say, poison? Was it modeled after a sting? Melissa said to the air, Come pick blades. Suddenly there were 3 more people in the room. Two were young women, and the third was a young man, tall and heavy. All wore the same brown uniforms over yellow blouses, as did Daisy and Violet. "Iris, Marigold, and Vetch," said Melissa, waving a hand at them in introduction. They smiled at the mortals, then went over to the table and began murmuring among themselves. And we will go on with the political discussion and the espionage preparation next time.